The arrival of the aliens. It was a quiet night. The only sound in the room was the soft scratching of a pencil on paper. Assad sat at his desk, staring at his math homework. He tapped his pencil against his forehead, hoping for inspiration. The equations seemed endless, and his brain felt tired. Outside, the night was calm. The moon shone brightly, and the stars twinkled in the dark sky. Everything was normal. Or so Assad thought. Suddenly, a bright flash of light filled the room. Assad blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust. The light came from a strange, glowing portal in the middle of his room. He gasped, pushing back his chair. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't normal. Then, out of the portal, 3 small creatures stepped forward. They were short, barely reaching Assad's waist. Their skin was a strange shade of green, and their eyes were large and round, glowing like tiny flashlights. They had long fingers, thin arms, and small bobbing heads. Assad wanted to scream, but his voice was stuck in his throat. The 3 creatures stared at his desk, their big eyes locked onto his open notebook. One of them pointed a long finger at the paper. "There it is," it said in a deep, robotic voice. Assad's heart nearly stopped. They could talk. The second alien stepped closer, its tiny hands shaking. "The equation. It's here." The third alien pressed a strange device on its wrist. A hologram appeared above the notebook, showing the same math problem that Assad had been struggling with. The numbers and symbols floated in the air, spinning slowly. Assad found his voice. What are you talking about?" The first alien turned its glowing eyes to him. "You wrote this, human." Assad hesitated. Yeah. It's my math homework." The aliens gasped. They looked at each other in shock. The second alien's hands trembled as it reached out and gently touched the notebook, as if it were holding something sacred. "Impossible," it whispered. The third alien pressed another button on its wrist. A holographic screen appeared, filled with strange symbols and alien text. "Confirmed," it said. "This problem matches the one from the Great Archive." Assad frowned. "What archive? What are you guys talking about?" The first alien took a deep breath. "We come from the planet Zephyr 9. Our civilization is highly advanced. We have conquered space, mastered energy, and even created artificial stars." The second alien nodded. "But there is one thing we could never solve. This equation." It pointed at the math problem on Assad's notebook. Assad blinked. "Wait, you're telling me your entire alien civilization couldn't solve my math homework?" The aliens nodded seriously. Assad almost laughed. This had to be a dream. Or a prank. Maybe he had fallen asleep at his desk. How could aliens struggle with simple algebra? But the aliens weren't joking. The third one stepped forward. "We have traveled light years to find the one who wrote this, and now we have found you, human." Assad gulped. "Okay, so what do you want from me?" The first alien's glowing eyes locked onto his. "We need you to come with us. If you do not help us solve this problem, our entire civilization could be destroyed." Assad's mouth went dry. Destroyed? Because of a math problem? The second alien nodded. "We do not have time to explain. Our enemies have intercepted our signals. If they learn we cannot solve this equation, they will invade. We must find the answer before it is too late." The portal behind them flashed brighter, pulsing with energy. The alien stepped aside, motioning for Assad to follow. He hesitated. This was insane. He had homework due tomorrow, chores to do, and a life on Earth. But at the same time, how often did someone get the chance to save an entire alien race just by solving a math problem? Assad took a deep breath. "Okay," he said. "I'll come with you." The alien sighed in relief. "Thank you, human. You may have just saved the galaxy." Assad stepped forward into the glowing portal. And then, everything went dark. The mission begins. Assad's eyes fluttered open, but what he saw didn't make sense. The ceiling above him glowed a soft blue, like it was made of liquid light. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sweet, almost like burnt sugar. He sat up quickly, his heart racing. This wasn't his room. The walls were smooth, curved, and pulsing with faint lights that moved like they were alive. The floor felt soft, almost like walking on a trampoline, and there was no sign of Earth anywhere. Then it hit him, the aliens. The portal. It hadn't been a dream. "You are awake," said a deep, echoing voice. Assad spun around. The three aliens stood nearby, staring at him with their large, glowing eyes. But now, they weren't alone. Behind them was a giant window, and through it, Assad could see the endless black of space. Stars sparkled in every direction, and strange, glowing planets floated far in the distance. One of them was a deep red, swirling with storms. Another looked like it was covered in giant crystals that sparkled like diamonds. Assad's mouth dropped open. He was in space, on a spaceship, with aliens. "This is crazy," he whispered. The first alien stepped forward. "No, human. This is only the beginning." Assad shook his head. Wait. Hold on. You seriously kidnapped me? For my math homework?" The second alien's eyes glowed brighter. "Not just any homework. Your equations contain patterns we have never seen. Our most advanced computers couldn't solve them." Assad rubbed his temples. This had to be the weirdest day of his life. "Listen," Assad said, trying to stay calm. "It's just algebra. Basic stuff. I don't even like math." The third alien let out a strange, clicking noise, like laughter, but metallic and cold. "Your species hides its genius well, pretending not to understand your own powerful knowledge. Clever." Assad sighed. There was no convincing them. Suddenly, the spaceship shook violently. The lights flickered, and Assad grabbed onto the nearest wall to keep from falling over. "What was that?" Assad shouted. The first alien looked grim. "Our enemies have found us. They know we are close to solving the equation. We must hurry." The second alien waved a hand, and a part of the wall morphed into a holographic screen. On it, Assad saw strange ships approaching. They were black and sharp-edged, like giant metal insects, with glowing red lights for eyes. "Those ships belong to the Krylox," the alien explained. "They are a ruthless species. If they find out we cannot solve this problem, they will destroy not just us, but your planet as well." Assad's eyes widened. "Wait, Earth is in danger too." The alien nodded. "Your equation is the key to a weapon powerful enough to control galaxies. The Krylox believe you created it." Assad's head was spinning. This was insane. How could his math homework be connected to a galactic weapon? He wasn't even good at math. The ship shook again, harder this time. The aliens moved quickly, pressing buttons and barking strange commands in their alien language. The holographic screen showed the Krylox ships getting closer, their weapons glowing. The first alien turned to Assad. "We need you to solve the equation. Now." Assad looked at the notebook they had placed in front of him. It was still his homework, the same boring equations he had been struggling with back on Earth. But now, it felt different, more dangerous. Taking a deep breath, Assad picked up a strange alien pen they handed him. It felt light, like it was made of air. He stared at the first problem, his mind racing. But the numbers didn't make sense anymore. They were shifting, moving like they were alive. The equations twisted into new shapes, symbols he didn't recognize. His heart pounded harder. I can't do this," Assad stammered. "You must," the first alien said. "If you don't, we are all doomed." Assad closed his eyes, trying to focus. But just as he was about to write something down, the ship shook violently again, throwing him off balance. Suddenly, the third alien shouted, "They're boarding the ship." The Krylox were here. Alarms blared, and the walls of the spaceship glowed bright red. The aliens grabbed strange weapons from the walls, their eyes full of fear. The first alien turned to Assad one last time. "Solve it, human. It's the only way to save your world." Assad's hands trembled as he looked back at the swirling, impossible equations. And then the door exploded. Galactic Council's judgment. The explosion still echoed in Assad's ears when everything suddenly stopped. 1 second, the door had burst open with a blinding flash, and the terrifying, insect-like Kryloks were storming in. The next, there was complete silence. The lights in the spaceship froze mid-flicker. Even the smoke from the blast hung in the air, unmoving. Assad blinked, realizing that time itself had somehow paused. Before he could even process what was happening, the walls around him began to shift and melt away. The metal folded in on itself like liquid, revealing the new space beyond. An endless, glowing corridor that stretched far into the distance. The aliens, still frozen in place, began to fade, like they were being erased. Then, out of nowhere, a voice boomed around him. It wasn't coming from any direction. It was everywhere at once, vibrating through his bones. "The human is being summonied." Assad's legs moved on their own. It felt like invisible hands were pulling him forward, guiding him down the glowing corridor. His heart pounded, but his body refused to stop. This wasn't normal. This wasn't even science fiction anymore. This was something else entirely. After what felt like hours, or maybe just seconds, he arrived at a massive doorway. It was shaped like an eye, and it pulsed with a strange, golden light. Assad didn't want to go in. Every part of his brain screamed run, but his feet kept moving forward. The doors slowly creaked open with a sound like thunder. Inside was a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling stretched so high that Assad couldn't see the top. The walls were covered in glowing symbols that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. But what caught his attention, what made his breath catch in his throat, were the beings waiting inside. They were enormous, towering figures, each one at least 100 feet tall, with shapes that Assad couldn't fully understand. Some looked like twisted shadows, others like living constellations of stars. Their eyes glowed like suns, and their voices rumbled like earthquakes. This wasn't just any alien council. This was the Galactic Council, the most powerful beings in the universe. And they were all staring at him. "The human has brought the equation." The voice came from a being that looked like it was made entirely of swirling gas and light. Another one, shaped like a giant metallic cube floating in midair, spoke next. "You will present your knowledge. Now." Assad's knees felt weak. I don't even know what's going on," he stammered. "It's just my homework. I don't know anything." The council murmured among themselves, their deep voices shaking the ground beneath Assad's feet. "The human pretends ignorance," one of them hissed. This one had no face, just a swirling black hole where its head should have been. "But the equation is clear. It holds power beyond understanding." Assad shook his head desperately. "No, it's just algebra. I didn't mean to, whatever you think I did." The being made of light leaned forward, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Your planet's primitive education system hides its true power well. But this is not a game, human. This equation has already caused ripples across galaxies. If it is not solved, your world will be destroyed." Assad felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. This couldn't be happening. How had his stupid math homework turned into a threat to the entire Earth? Then, without warning, a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed Earth, floating peacefully in space, but surrounding it were dozens of glowing red markers, weapons aimed right at his home planet. "Assad of Earth," the council boomed. "You have one chance to prove that your species is not a threat. Solve the equation, or watch your planet burn." The room grew deadly silent. Assad could feel their eyes burning into him, waiting. He looked down at the hologram of his notebook, the same math problem he had stared at back in his room. But now it felt like the most impossible thing in the universe. His hands trembled. But then something strange happened. Assad remembered something his math teacher had said once when he was struggling with a problem in class. Sometimes the hardest problems just need a different way of thinking. He took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. Maybe he wasn't supposed to solve this like a math problem. Maybe this was something else. But before he could write anything down, the chamber began to shake violently. The council members looked around, confused. And then, with a deafening roar, the Krylocks burst into the chamber. They had followed Assad here, and they weren't here to talk. Assad had to make a choice, solve the impossible equation, or run for his life. And time was running out. The impossible equation. Assad had always thought the weirdest thing he'd ever experienced was his math teacher calling him brilliant for solving the simple algebra problem. But now, standing in the middle of a collapsing alien council chamber with giant insect-like Krylocks storming in and 100-foot-tall cosmic beings glaring down at him, he realized. This was way worse. Blaster fire echoed off the glowing walls as the Krylocks attacked, their red eyes glowing with fury. The Galactic Council roared in a dozen alien languages, their massive forms shifting into defensive stances, but Assad wasn't looking at any of that. Because floating in front of him, glowing and spinning in midair, was a new equation, and Assad hadn't written this one. It hovered in the space between him and the Council, burning bright blue, as if it had been waiting for him. But unlike his regular math homework, this equation wasn't just numbers and letters. It was alive. The symbols shifted when he looked at them, twisting into impossible shapes, changing every time he blinked. It was like the universe itself was trying to write a math problem, and Assad was the poor fool stuck trying to solve it. The first alien from Zephyr 9, the one who had kidnapped him from Earth, stumbled over to him, dodging laser blasts. "This is not the original equation," it hissed. "This is something new, something impossible." Assad's heart was racing. "What do you mean impossible? I thought my homework was the problem." The alien's glowing eyes narrowed. "Your homework was only the beginning. This is something far greater. Someone, or something, is testing you." Assad stared at the swirling symbols. The longer he looked, the more he realized that this wasn't just math anymore. It was a message. But from who? And why him? The Galactic Council's voices boomed over the chaos. "Human, you must solve this now. The balance of the galaxy depends on it." Assad shook his head. "I don't even know what this is." The Krylocks were getting closer now, their jagged weapons cutting through the air. One of them lunged at Assad, its claws outstretched, but before it could reach him, the alien from Zephyr 9 fired a blaster, sending the creature flying backward. "You don't have time to understand," the alien snapped. "Just solve it." Assad looked at the equation again, trying to calm his racing mind. But every time he thought he saw a pattern, the symbols would shift and twist into something new. It was like the equation was alive, and it didn't want to be solved. And that's when Assad realized something. It wasn't a math problem. It was a puzzle. He remembered what his teacher had once told him. Sometimes you have to stop thinking with your head and start thinking with your gut. So that's what he did. Ignoring the chaos around him, the explosions, the blaster fire, the screams of alien beings, Assad closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He stopped trying to solve the equation and started to feel it. And slowly the symbols began to make sense. They weren't numbers. They were stories, patterns of events that had happened across the galaxy, moments in time stitched together in mathematical form. It was the history of the universe itself, written as an equation. And the missing piece was him. His eyes snapped open. "I'm the answer," he whispered. The alien beside him stared. "What?" "I'm the missing piece. Assad repeated, louder this time. This isn't about the math. It's about me. I'm the solution. Without thinking, Assad reached out and touched the glowing equation. The moment his fingers made contact, the symbols exploded into light, wrapping around him in a blinding swirl of energy. The Krylox screamed in rage. The Galactic Council roared in surprise, and Assad felt something shift deep inside him, like a door opening in his mind. He wasn't just solving the equation, he was becoming part of it. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was all Assad could see. And then, everything went dark. When Assad opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the council chamber anymore. He was floating in empty space, surrounded by stars. But he wasn't alone. Before him stood a figure made entirely of light, its form shifting and changing like the symbols in the equation. It spoke without words, its voice echoing in his mind. You have solved the impossible, human. But this is only the beginning. Assad stared at the glowing figure, his mind racing with questions. But before he could speak, the figure raised a hand. And with a flash of light, Assad was pulled back into the chaos of the council chamber. But something was different. The Krylox had stopped moving. The Galactic Council stood frozen, staring at Assad with wide, glowing eyes. And the impossible equation. It was gone. But Assad could feel it inside him now, a glowing spark of knowledge burning in his chest. And he knew, deep down, that his journey was far from over. The human advantage. For a long, breathless moment, everything was still. Assad stood in the middle of the shattered Galactic Council chamber, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. Around him, the towering alien overlords, beings of light, shadow, and impossible shapes, stared in complete silence. The Krylox, those terrifying insect-like invaders, were frozen mid-attack, their claws inches from the council members, their red eyes dimming with confusion. The impossible equation that had hovered in the air just moments ago, glowing, shifting, alive, was gone. But Assad could still feel it, like a spark burning under his skin, buzzing in the back of his mind. And then, the silence broke. What have you done? The council's voice echoed through the chamber, low and vibrating, like the very bones of the universe were speaking. Assad took a shaky breath, glancing at the alien from Zephyr 9, the one who had dragged him across galaxies for his math homework. Its glowing eyes were wide, its mouth hanging open. I solved it, Assad said quietly, almost not believing it himself. The room erupted into chaos. The council roared in disbelief. The Krylox hissed and screeched in rage, their weapons rising again. The Zephyr 9 aliens were shouting in their strange language, pointing at Assad like he was some kind of ancient weapon they'd just accidentally triggered. But Assad, he was done being scared. Before anyone could react, Assad reached into his backpack, the one he'd been carrying since Earth, which somehow had survived everything, and pulled out the simplest tool in human history, a pencil. The Galactic Council stopped mid-roar. The Krylox froze, confused. Assad held up the pencil like it was a sword. You dragged me across the universe for a math problem, he said, his voice louder now, stronger. But you know what? You guys with all your advanced technology missed the simplest answer. He walked over to the shattered hologram projector in the center of the room. With a quick flick, he grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor and used it as a makeshift whiteboard. The council watched in stunned silence as Assad took his pencil and began to write. No glowing holograms, no advanced alien tech, just a human, a pencil, and basic math. Assad scribbled out the equation, the same one that had sent these aliens into a panic, the same one their supercomputers couldn't solve. And with a few quick strokes, he drew a line through the middle of the problem, rearranged a few numbers, and circled the answer. There. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd just finished a normal day of homework. It's done. The room was dead silent. The Zephyr 9 alien crept forward, its long fingers trembling as it picked up the glass shard and stared at the answer. Its glowing eyes flicked back and forth, reading and rereading Assad's simple solution. And then it fell to its knees. "The human," it whispered. "The human solved what the stars could not." The council shifted, their massive forms looming over Assad. "Impossible," one of them boomed. "Our technology, our wisdom, it could not solve this." Assad crossed his arms. "Yeah, well, maybe you guys overcomplicate things. Sometimes you don't need fancy computers. You just need a pencil and a little common sense." For the first time, the Kryloks hesitated. Their claws lowered slightly, and their red eyes flickered with uncertainty. They had been prepared to fight a galactic war over this equation. But now they were facing something they didn't understand. A human. One of the council members, a massive being made of swirling stardust, leaned closer to Assad. Its glowing eyes narrowed. "What are you, human?" Assad shrugged. "I'm just a kid who didn't finish his homework." The room erupted again. But this time, it wasn't chaos. It was shock. The aliens, the council, even the Kryloks, all of them were trying to process what had just happened. The problem that had stumped entire civilizations had been solved by a teenager with a pencil. And that's when Assad realized something. Humans were different. Not because they had better technology or bigger brains, but because they could think in ways no alien could. Where the council saw complexity, Assad saw simplicity. Where the Kryloks saw a weapon, Assad saw a puzzle. And that was the real human advantage. The council finally spoke again, their deep voices rumbling through the chamber. "You have done what we could not. You have shown us a new way to think." The Kryloks hissed in frustration, but didn't attack. They knew they had been beaten, not by strength, but by something they couldn't understand. Assad let out a long breath, his heart finally slowing. He glanced at the Zephyr 9 alien beside him. "So, can I go home now?" The alien nodded slowly. "You have saved more than just our civilization, human. You have saved the galaxy." Assad rolled his eyes. "Yeah, great. But I still have to explain to my teacher why I don't have my homework." The council chuckled, a deep cosmic sound that shook the floor. With a wave of their hands, the Galactic Council opened a portal back to Earth, its swirling light reflecting in Assad's tired eyes. But just before he stepped through, the Zephyr 9 alien called out to him. "Human," it said, its voice softer now. "If we face another challenge, will you help us again?" Assad smirked. "Only if it's not geometry." And with that, he stepped into the portal, leaving behind a room full of the most powerful beings in the universe, completely baffled by a human and his pencil. The ultimate test. Assad had barely stepped through the glowing portal when he realized something was wrong. He expected to find himself back in his messy bedroom, maybe staring at his half-finished homework and wondering if this whole galactic adventure had been some weird, math-induced dream. But instead, he was standing in a place that felt empty. Not empty like an abandoned room or a silent street. This was a different kind of empty, a space between spaces. The ground beneath his feet wasn't solid, but it wasn't air either. It felt like walking on a memory, something half real, half forgotten. The sky above wasn't dark or light. It was a swirling, colorless void, like the universe itself had paused, holding its breath. And then he heard it, a voice that wasn't a voice at all, more like a feeling that crawled into his mind and whispered directly into his thoughts. "You solved the equation, but are you ready for the real challenge?" Assad spun around, but there was no one there. Just the endless, shifting void. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely, as if the space itself was listening. The voice answered, but this time it felt like it was coming from inside him. The Galactic Council believed the equation was the key. The Kryloks thought it was a weapon. But they were wrong. It was only the beginning. Assad's heart raced. "What do you mean the beginning? I solved your impossible math problem." I saved the galaxy. What more do you want from me?" The void pulsed, and suddenly, in front of him, a new figure appeared. It wasn't an alien like the Zephyr 9 scientists, and it wasn't one of the towering Galactic Council beings. This figure looked familiar, too familiar. It looked like Assad, but older, sharper. His eyes glowed with the same strange light as the aliens, and his expression was calm, almost bored, like he'd seen everything the universe had to offer, and wasn't impressed. "The final test, Assad," the figure said, his voice eerily matching Assad's own. "It's not about solving equations or saving galaxies. It's about proving what makes you human." Assad took a step back, his mind spinning. "What are you?" The figure smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't. "I knew Assad, the version of you who failed." Assad's stomach dropped. "Failed? What are you talking about?" The void began to shift around them, and scenes from different worlds flickered into existence. Earth cities crumbling, alien planets burning, entire galaxies collapsing into nothingness. "This is what happens if you fail this test," the figure said, his glowing eyes locked onto Assad's. "It's not about math anymore. It's about who you are, what you'll become." Assad clenched his fists. "I didn't come this far just to lose now." The figure's smile widened. "Good, because the final test isn't something you can solve with a pencil." He snapped his fingers, and the void transformed again. Now, Assad was standing in front of a massive, glowing cube. It floated in the air, humming with strange energy. Symbols and patterns danced across its surface, shifting and rearranging faster than Assad could follow. "This," the figure said, gesturing to the cube, "is the ultimate puzzle. No one in the galaxy has ever solved it. Not the Council, not the Krylox, not even me." Assad frowned. "Then how am I supposed to solve it?" The figure leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because you're human." And then, without another word, the figure disappeared, leaving Assad alone with the pulsing, impossible cube. For a moment, Assad just stared at it, his mind blank. This wasn't like the other problems. There were no clear numbers, no familiar symbols, no hints to guide him. It was just chaos, constantly shifting, never staying the same. But then he remembered something. The lesson he'd learned back in the Galactic Council chamber. Sometimes, it's not about solving the problem. It's about understanding the problem. Taking a deep breath, Assad stepped closer to the cube. He didn't try to force it into a solution. Instead, he watched. He listened. He let the patterns flow, let the chaos swirl around him without trying to control it. And slowly, he began to see it. Beneath the shifting symbols and impossible patterns, there was a rhythm, a pulse, like the beating of a heart. The cube wasn't a puzzle. It was a reflection of him, of humanity, of the universe itself. And Assad realized the truth. There was no solution. The cube wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be understood. With that realization, Assad reached out and placed his hand on the cube. Instantly, the chaotic symbols stopped shifting. The cube glowed brighter and brighter until it was blinding, and then, boom! A shockwave of light exploded outwards, and Assad felt himself being pulled through space and time, his mind expanding and collapsing all at once. When the light faded, Assad was standing in his bedroom. His math homework was still on the desk, half finished. The pencil was still where he'd left it. Outside, the world was quiet, as if nothing had happened. But Assad knew better, because deep inside, he could still feel the pulse of the universe, and he knew that whatever that test had been, he had passed. But somehow, he also knew it wasn't over. The return home. Assad opened his eyes and immediately knew something was different. He was back in his bedroom, the same creaky desk, the half-finished math homework still sitting there, mocking him with its boring simplicity. The walls were the same faded color. His backpack was slumped on the floor, and the faint buzz of his old ceiling fan hummed above. It looked exactly like it had before this whole crazy adventure started. But Assad wasn't the same. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the pencil in his hand. The same pencil he'd used to solve equations that had stumped the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The same pencil that had somehow saved entire planets and defeated enemies who saw humans as nothing more than primitive creatures. And now, here he was, back on Earth, about to face the most terrifying force in the universe, his math teacher. A knock at his door startled him out of his thoughts. It creaked open, and his mom peeked in. "Assad, dinner's ready. Don't forget your homework. It's due tomorrow." Assad blinked. For a second, he almost laughed out loud. Homework. After everything he'd just been through, the idea of worrying about math homework felt ridiculous. But then he glanced at his notebook and froze. The problem that had started everything, the simple algebra equation that had dragged him into a galactic crisis, was still there. But now, something was different. There was a new problem at the bottom of the page, one he definitely hadn't written. It glowed faintly, the numbers and symbols shifting ever so slightly. Just like the impossible equations he'd seen in space, Assad's heart skipped a beat. No way. Before he could process what he was seeing, his phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up, expecting a text from a friend or maybe an alert about a new game update. But instead, the screen displayed a message in a language he didn't recognize, except somehow he understood it perfectly. "We will return for your assistance, human. The galaxy is not finished with you yet." Assad's stomach dropped. He stared at the glowing message, his mind racing. They were coming back. But before he could think about it too much, his alarm buzzed. It was time for school. The next day, Assad trudged into his math class, his backpack feeling heavier than usual. Not because of books, but because he was carrying the weight of the universe's biggest secret, that he, a regular kid who didn't even like math, had solved a problem that could have destroyed the galaxy. And now he had to explain why he didn't finish the rest of his homework. He slid into his seat as the teacher, Mr. Qureshi, walked in, looking as grumpy as ever. Assad could practically hear the lecture coming. Sure enough, Mr. Qureshi stopped at Assad's desk, raising an eyebrow. "Well, Assad, where's the rest of your homework?" Assad opened his mouth, ready to blurt out the truth. "Aliens stole it. I saved the galaxy. The Galactic Council thinks I'm a genius." But the words caught in his throat. No one would believe him. Heck, he barely believed it. So instead, he just shrugged and said the only thing that made sense. "Aliens took it." There was a long, awkward pause. Mr. Qureshi stared at him, unblinking. The whole class went silent. Then Mr. Qureshi sighed and scribbled something in his grade book. "I've heard better excuses," he muttered, walking away. Assad sank into his seat, trying not to laugh. If only he knew. But as he stared down at his notebook, the faintly glowing problem still teasing him from the corner of the page, he realized something. This wasn't over. The galaxy knew about humans now, knew about him. And while he might have just wanted to go back to being a regular kid, the universe had other plans. For now, though, Assad would enjoy the quiet. After all, how hard could Earth life be compared to saving the galaxy with a pencil? But deep down, Assad knew the truth. The next problem was coming. And this time, it wouldn't just be about math.